Hi guys, welcome to a new video. In this video I thought we're gonna do a Debian Expert install in VirtualBox just to show the process. It's pretty easy once you've done it and shouldn't pose no problem. So let's get started. First of all, if you need an ISO of Debian, you can simply open your browser of choice and go to www.debian.org or just debian.org. You don't need the www. And you simply click on download. Since I already downloaded the image, I will cancel the download here and we will go over to VirtualBox. Here I created a new virtual machine. I gave it 4 cores and 4 gigs of RAM, which is more than plenty for a simple base install with no GUI. But I like to sometimes give my virtual machines a little bit more resources, so in the future I can stock them up and maybe I want to run a GUI, or I want to run programs, or I want to install something. So for me personally, I tend to assign a little more, but this is totally up to you. You don't need that much resources. So let me just start the virtual machine. There we go. And let me minimize that. And first of all, what you have is the boot menu. You have the graphical install, the installer, and advanced options. What we want to do, since we want to do an expert install, we need to go into advanced options and select the expert install. There we go. It'll take a couple of seconds. Here we are. And let me see if I can make this a little bigger so you people can see better. So let me get this over, and this should be better. So first of all, you choose the language of the system. I'm not a native English speaker, and I don't live in the US or Australia or in the UK or somewhere, but I always set my systems to English. That has a lot of upsides, especially error messages. If you need to Google something, or if you need to research some certain kind of problem you're having, it's better to have the message in English than have it localized in your own language, which the translation is, of course, like with any language, it's not always one-to-one. So I will choose English. I will choose another territory. This is important, keep that in mind. And let me select Germany, there we go. And for the local setting, I use English US. I don't need to add any additional locales, so I just enter on this. I don't need a braille display and I don't need accessibility, so I go over to configure the keyboard. And here it's the same thing again. I choose my local keyboard. And next on the agenda is detecting the installation media. Yes, we want that. And as you can tell, Debian found, hey, there is a Debian image currently available, and I found it. So basically it's just a little reaction from the installer that you have an install media present. All right, this is interesting. You could do, for example, a network install. I'll show you this quickly. It's the network console. If you activate the network console, after this, there will be an immediate setup of the networking, so you can connect over SSH to the installer and finish the installation over SSH. In our case, we don't need anything special in here, so we just leave it. Alright, so it loads all the components it needs. This takes usually a couple of seconds. And let's go over to the networking hardware. There we go. Networking you could do a static configuration or a DHCP. In my case, I will use a static configuration, but you could just choose yes here and have it automatically set up with DHCP. So let me quickly enter an IP address. There we go. This is my gateway. And for the name server, I will pick Google. This is correct, yes. And now Debian checks if everything works. Okay, next step is the host name. A dreaded thing, since I personally always struggle with finding host names. I used to alternate between a couple of things, but anyone knows this kind of issue. What kind of host name do I give my machine? In this case, we will just call it VB Debian. I don't need a domain name normally, but I will give it one. Again, this is not necessary. Next up is to set up the user and passwords. This is kind of interesting. You could go two ways. You could allow root login, which you need to give a password to the root account so you can log in, or you could say no. And if you select no, the user that will be created after that, your user, will automatically have sudo permissions. In my case, I guess I'm a little old school. I'll keep the root login, give it a password, and now it asks me to create a normal user. So let me just do that. Username, yes. Password. All right, and let's configure the clock next. I want to use NTP, Network Time Protocol, to synchronize my clock, so I select yes, and the default is fine. You could, of course, put in another NTP server. Let me just give you an example. You could use depool.ntp.org or anything local to your area. That's totally up to you. Okay, and it's detected. Europe, Berlin, this is correct. And now we go over to detecting and partitioning the disks. In my case, I will do a simple layout. You could do encrypted LVM with locks. You could do an LVM setup, or you could use the entire disk and just wipe it. This is what I'm going to do. There's nothing on the disk right now, since this is a newly created virtual machine. And you can see Debian by default creates a root partition and a swap. There's a little alteration I do here. I will kill the swap partition and the root partition. This is fine. And I will dedicate a whole partition for the root partition, since I'm going to be using a swap file. I don't need a swap partition. After that is done, you could simply... Debian now complains that you don't have a swap partition, a dedicated one, but this is fine. I don't need to return to the partitioning screen, and I want to write the changes to disk. There we go. And next up is installation of the base system, all your base utilities that you need for day-to-day work with Debian. I will pause the video and we'll come back once this is finished. So this took about half a minute roughly. Next up is the selection of the kernel image. So we want to use the default kernel image. You could also choose a specific version, but I just use the meta package. So I always have the most current kernel in the release. When there's an update, it will get automatically updated. Next up is the init RAM disk. You could do generic or targeted. I used to do targeted init RAM disks, so only include what I need for the boot, but honestly nowadays I just go for a generic and call it a day. Alright, it configures the kernel. This might take a couple of seconds. Normally it's not too long. So there we go. Next up on the list is configuring the package manager, which is apt. It has found my installation media, which is just a net install ISO, but it asks, do you want to scan extra media? Maybe you have a Debian DVD or something, but in my case, no, I don't need that. I will use a network mirror since we use the net install image, and just select a location that's geographically local to your area. I don't need a proxy. I will use non-free firmware and non-free software, and you don't have to do this. You can enable the source repositories in case you need to get the source for a package or build a package. I enable it, but this is not a hard and fast rule. There we go. All right. And now this is an important screen, at least for me. First of all, security updates and release updates should always be ticked on in a stable release. The fun part is the backported software. Backports, for example, have newer kernels, newer versions of programs that have been, like the name suggests, backported from testing over to stable. I always activate backported software in case I need something newer or a specific program in a newer version. All right, so let's get over to selecting and installing software. So the first thing it's going to do, it's going to download all the needed bits, or it does basically an update of the software that's already provided, and then it'll ask you later, task cell, hey, what do you actually want to install? Do you want to install a desktop? Which desktop environment you want? Do you want SSH, etc. So this is the step where it configures the kernel, because there was an update for it. And okay, here we are. So you could, this is pretty neat. You could set up automatic updates, or you can simply disable them. If I do automatic updates, I'll do it by myself after the installation, but you have the choice. You could enable it or not. For me, at the moment, I'm not. Popularity contest is pretty interesting. If you can, I would do it. Basically, it collects information about the packages you have installed and sends it back to PopCon. So simply that the Debian devs have some idea what kind of packages people run. I activate it. This is of course up to you. Let's run task cells. So what do we want? We do not want a desktop, but we want SSH. As you can see from the list here, you could install a Debian desktop, for example, if you want KDE or Cinnamon, or maybe you want more than one, you can activate as many as you want. In our case, we are installing a base system, and I activate SSH. So SSH is on when we start the machine or when it boots up. It's already there, it's installed. So let's continue. This will run for a second. I will pause the recording and come back later. So here we are again, and the next step and the final step at that is installing the bootloader. In this case we will use grub. Force the installation and removal media path. No, we don't need that. And this is an interesting option. You can force Debian to start automatically so that the NVRAM is basically updated so that Debian always boots. I do that. That's totally up to you though. So pro auto detect should grub search for other operating systems. In my case, I just installed Debian on the VM and there's not going to be another operating system next to it, so I will select no. If you on your PC or on another machine, a laptop, and you have two operating systems, maybe you have two dedicated disks, an NVMe for example and an SSD, it would make sense to activate OSProber so he can find another operating system next to Debian. In my case, I don't need that. So this will only take a couple of seconds, and we are at the prompt to finish the installation. Basically, all you have to do after that is starting the virtual machine and make sure you can SSH into it. That's basically all you gotta do after it. This part will take usually just a couple of seconds, and it is usually quite fast. As you can see, it downloads microcode for my CPU. Wouldn't be necessary on a VM, but the Debian installer does that automatically. And this is important. If you have a dual boot with Windows, you might want to select no, so that you have the system clock in local time, or you could select yes, and if, for example, if you dual boot Windows, you could change Windows's way of setting the clock. You could change that to UTC. In my case, this is only a Debian machine. We will select yes. And that was it. The machine reboots. There we go, the Debian boot screen, or the grub bootloader rather. And let's open our terminal here. and see if we can connect to the machine. Yes, that looks good. And we are connected. So basically that was just a little tutorial on how to install Debian with the Expert installer, and I hope you enjoyed this one. So take care guys and have a good day.